sales is about one thing and one thing only. It's about the number of at-bats. The more often we get an opportunity to speak to someone who may have a benefit of the value we have to offer, the more often that can occur, the higher likelihood that they're going to say,
Cash flow. Cash flow. Did you clear your cash flow?
So let's just dive right in here. I know we have a bunch of topic threads lined up for today. I guess the most timely one is this whole FTX collapse. It looks like it all kind of went down on Thursday and Friday last week. Really wild story. I've been reading some of the headlines on it. Curious to get your thoughts. I know you had some thoughts in the email dialogue we had over the weekends. Funniest one, I would say, not a funny situation, but the funniest thing I saw on the whole thing was a video. I don't know if you saw this one of Martin Shkreli, the pharma bro, with Do Kwon from Luna. He was the last crypto collapse, last month, and or a couple of months ago. Then there was Sam Bankman-Fried, and Martin Shkreli's on the video saying like, so I just want to tell you guys that prison's not that bad. It's really not. I hope you guys don't go to prison, but if you do, it's not that bad. And then you just see the video shut off on Sam Bankman-Fried.
Click. Yeah. Well, white collar crime, right? It's you get the slap on the hands. But no, it's interesting, and I suppose everything is hindsight's 2020, right? But basically, I don't even think it's crypto as much as it's just pure unadulterated speculation and greed. And I'm more of a fundamentalist. I love the concept and the technology behind blockchain. I think that's the future in many applications. It's not going to, I don't believe, for quite a long time, if it ever rules the world per se, where we have one global currency. However, as far as its practical uses in business, gosh, the Pandora's box hasn't even been opened. I mean, the myriad of things that it can do, essentially blockchain is a database. It's a database, a highly secure database. And if you're doing transactions, many of our clients are in manufacturing. And they're dealing with a lot of supply chain issues, and just the simple idea of having validation, verification of getting that order when you got it. It only came to you because there's companies can play some games as far as volumes and quantities, when they need to, and just to organize that database with other technologies kind of interspersed. I just think there's so much that the blockchain technology can do. The currency itself, who's to say? Everybody jumped on the bandwagon. I was thinking of I think it was the tulip. I believe it was like in the, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1600s, maybe a little later.
The tulip craze,
the tulip craze. It's kind of the benchmark for market hysteria, right? Everybody, went long on tulip bulbs from Holland. You got everyone in, and they skyrocketed in value, and eventually they came back down to reality.
It's hilarious to think about, but in 500 or 600 years, are people going to look back on what's happening now and just think like, oh, that's like, what the hell are they doing? It's so ridiculous.
I don't even think, I think it's like today. That's how I see it, now. I don't know how history is going to look at it.
I heard the first currency, and maybe this is just like crypto people just saying weird stuff, but I heard that the first currency that is traceable in history is like, several thousand years back, and it was seashells or something in Africa, like because there was only a certain amount of seashells that wash up on shore.
Right.
And it's laborious to go get them, and the quality of them varies, and like the value of them. And so seashells were used to exchange goods and services.
Yeah. How is this much different in concept than that? So again, the whole cryptocurrency craze phenomenon. I mean, if you're a market timer, you could have killed it, right? And you still can, And I don't know what the underlying value. That's the tough part. Like, what is the actual value? It's essentially supply and demand function right now versus associated with any particular asset.
Yeah, the value is what people, I mean, it's like anything. Like the dollar is just a piece of paper. So, kind of when you think about
something.
What's that?
Right. It certainly does represent value, and it changes based on demand, right? Basic economics. But if you do look at the dollar, it's pretty stable currency in general, right? It's very stable.
Yeah, just people
it's just
believe
a piece of paper, but what it represents, right? So that's, again, the inherent value of the blockchain is that you can trace that one piece of paper, that particular dollar bill, through its entire life cycle until it's like either destroyed or just disappears somewhere, right? So again, I don't want to beat it with a dead horse, but a lot of value. I'm a big fan of Ethereum, actually, just because of the back end, not necessarily the ether itself, but the back end of that technology and how you can use it for multiple applications beyond just the currency piece of things.
Yeah, you said something earlier. Let's get to Ethereum in a second. I think we'll come full circle on that, because you said something earlier about supply chain specifically and validating transactions and kind of funny business with manufacturers and whatnot. And and then you talked about a secure database. And I think a lot of people, they think of secure databases as something that you can't get into. It's like really secure. The information inside of it is really secure. Right. Which isn't necessarily the case with blockchain. Blockchain's secure in a different way, in the sense that the record can't be tampered with. Everybody can see what the record is. So it's kind of the reverse of normal security.
That's true. No, and again, it's looking at the same problem with a different solution. You're spot on, right? It's a database, and okay, you can see, assuming you had access to that particular account, you can see where it's at, what stage it is, whose hands is it in right now, whose hands was it in, prior to getting here. And, look, I mean, for example, in the drug business too, legal drug business, by the way, pharmaceuticals, it's a highly regulated industry. And if there are any issues or problems with a particular drug or even medical device, those companies have to trace every component, every ingredient back to its origin, right? And that's very time-consuming, very laborious, very expensive. And tools like the blockchain can make that much, much easier to manage. And of course, also decrease the incidence of fake drugs or copycat drugs that may not have gone through that same regulatory safety process, right? So, gosh, it's just endless ways to use this technology that will be used. I remember it was when it was first kind of being talked about. This was probably, it seems like a long time ago these days, but I want to say probably about 4 years ago. I remember reading an article, and it was at PwC, a big consulting firm, and they were just talking about it. I'm like, oh, now that's interesting. And they weren't referring necessarily to the currency. They were referring to the database aspect, the chain, the blockchain, and all the different business applications. So and there's quite a few folks working on those. In fact, probably more than the currency folks in terms of actual applications in the business environment. So
there's a lot of I've heard some interesting ones. Like, for instance, this might be the first massive commercial rollout of blockchain in a really, let's say like a strong use case is in video games. So like people spend all this money on video games. Like you go and you buy something in a video game, like you spend like $50 on some sword or something. And all right, so you're done playing that game. What do you do with that sword you spent $50 on? So if it's an NFT and it's on the blockchain, you can put it onto, OpenSeas or whatever marketplace, sell it as an NFT, recoup whatever amount of, Ether or whatever, USD, whatever you want to recoup at that time, and then buy, whatever, a hand grenade in a different game.
Right. It democratizes markets for the people who have access to the market, right? Because it's only available to people who have the technology, the tools to operate that.
Sure.
I'm trying to remember which specific country. I believe it was Paraguay, but they committed, their president committed that they would use cryptocurrency as the mode of exchange. So they have an app. Most of the inhabitants have a mobile app. They may not have a laptop, but in terms of going to the market and buying your goods for dinner or whatever, that's how they're pushing everybody to exchange.
Yeah. Zimbabwe is another one. Their currency inflated so fast. Like I actually have a $10 trillion Zimbabwean bill. I have it in a frame just to kind of like think about, what is currency. I bought it on eBay for $10. Funny enough, that's worth $10, I guess. But at its peak of inflation, the actual conversion for that $10 trillion Zimbabwean bill was 40 cents USD.
Yeah.
So it's like a reminder now, it's funny. It comes back full circle. Now it's worth $10 on eBay, but it comes back full circle. It's like just to think about the concept of currency and economies and then, Zimbabwe, they're using, because their currency inflated so high and essentially collapsed the economy. They're using Bitcoin now as their transaction, and everything's relative in Bitcoin. So it's, with the price of Bitcoin fluctuating up and down, it's just kind of whatever, they just keep doing business.
But it's not several thousand% as the Zimbabwean currency fluctuates.
True.
Right?
Yeah. So I guess that Bitcoin's like a stable, the most stable currency, I guess, for them.
The dollar's actually the most stable currency, but the access to it in other countries is very limited, right? That's a fact.
I think they use some USD in Zimbabwe too. I think it's like a mixture of USD and Bitcoin, but it goes to show you like what happens when a currency inflates and the lessons that can be learned from that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've been fortunate. I've traveled the world a few times on some other people's dimes, right, for business. And I will tell you that, Vietnam, oh my gosh, Russia, China, not as much because they're pretty cracked down on those sort of things. Certainly Mexico, almost every South American, Central American country. You don't need to exchange currency. You just bring dollars. And they're fine with that. They're perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, definitely in Latin America. I ordered a sandwich at the airport, at the Medellin International Airport in Colombia.
Right.
It was like 50,000 Colombian pesos or something, which was like $3.
Right.
I forget the exact exchange, but it was something. It was in the tens of thousands of Colombian pesos.
Right.
But hey, let's go back to so just real quick so we can close the loop on FTX. So curious what your thoughts are. Obviously, Alameda seems to be kind of the culprit here for doing these wild, high leverage trades. The CEO, I forget her name. Something Ellison or something. I forget her name, but Caroline Ellison or something like that. I guess she was doing these like wild, ridiculous trades. And what do you have any thoughts? You said you saw a Wall Street Journal article about it?
I kind of broke down the chain of events as we know them anyway. And what does it all boil down to? The same thing it boils down to in most of these situations, whether it's crypto or some other fluctuating asset. People are just greedy. I mean, that's all there is to it. Some people take advantage of a situation they have and get to a point where they, believe that it's okay to do it. Right? They've just convinced themselves, and eventually the walls come caving down. That's the thing. I mean, there is no hiding, right? It's just so transparent. And not, granted, cryptocurrency in theory, and that's why it was attractive to illegal money transactions or untraceable money transactions. But once you get into the markets, it's all transparent. Eventually, every trade, every action.
I have a friend who's he's in Malvern, but his son is out, I think, in San Francisco, or maybe they're doing like the nomad thing. But they raised almost $100 million from who was it? Mark Benioff at Salesforce, I think, and Reid Hoffman at LinkedIn, and a few other funds. Basically, they're a crypto blockchain forensics company. So I think they're working with governments and banks and whatnot, auditors, to basically do like forensic analytics on blockchains.
That's amazing. Not surprising, but that's amazing, right? And fundamentally, aside from this instance, it's in the environment that we operate in, and we're business people. It really is about trying to find that inefficiency. Where's the inefficiency? Where is that better mousetrap? What's something that's going to make it easier to do something that I did before, faster, less expensive? That's the genesis of all these things. And so there you go. There's a company that saw that crypto could be used illegally, and there was a party, happened to be governments, who were interested in finding out who these people were or the forensics behind it, and now you have a business.
It's funny, they pivoted into that. So they started doing this was back in the ICO days when everyone was doing the ICOs. Before the SEC stepped in. And so they started out as an analytics platform to help you figure out how to launch your ICO and like maximize the it's something to have to do with ICOs. And then that whole market just dried up and evaporated. And I think they'd already raised a little bit of money by then. So they quickly pivoted into the forensics business, and that seems to be doing well from what I can tell.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it makes me think of, I had this, maybe it's a terrible idea, but it just occurred to me with, the blockchain. I don't know why I was thinking this, but if I wanted to record a video to my family and I only wanted them to see it after I was gone, I didn't want anybody to see it until then. I just thought, there's a potential business. You could record that video and be protected, by the blockchain, the ownership, and it would only be triggered once I don't know, a death certificate or something is happens, and otherwise, you would be confident that nobody at any stage, at any point, any parties would see any of that until such time that you were gone.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you talked about Ethereum. It's kind of like a programmatic lawyer in a way. It's got, the kind of like what we hire lawyers to do, like negotiate back and forth and write contracts and then make sure the contracts are upheld by, the spirit of the contract. But, it's a little bit more qualitative or kind of subjective in the, in real life, attorney lawyer space, whereas Ethereum's more quantitative. It's very much like
A, B, C, very linear, binary, really. I mean, you're right. I mean, there'd be a lot of, I suppose, legal services that could certainly make sure that the right people get the right asset.
No
matter what.
Well, I think there's a lot of stuff like, I think about right now, there's so many technologies that are maturing right now. We haven't had a ton of innovation other than just tools getting, marginally better over the last decade. There hasn't been, the last major innovation in my eyes was smartphones. That was kind of the last like game changer. But I think, the last decade has been kind of status quo or just slow growth. I think the next decade is going to be insane. And I think about it like it's like the Model T came out in like 1908. So I think about it, it's like 1905 for like, horseshoe manufacturers right now. I've been looking into the Open AI Codex API that just came out. It's in beta right now. And basically it's
I've made a bunch of pictures. It's so cool.
You're using DALL-E then, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's three APIs. There's three main ones. There's DALL-E, which is the image generation API. There's GPT-3, which is the natural language processing, and GPT-4 is on its way out. And then there's Codex, which basically is like the first two, but for writing software. So you can give it like instructions, apps, right? Yeah, exactly. You give it instructions and it writes code for you in any language. And there's already tools being built on it. And like right now, it's still kind of infant where it's not super strong yet, where you have to sort of do it like function by function, and you have to kind of like piece together the application. It doesn't always write the cleanest code, but the fact that it's doing that right now, in 10 years, I think it'll be strong enough where you could say like, hey, I have an HVAC company, we're regional, we're in these 3 states, we've got 150 trucks, here's access to our quoting repository, go analyze all the quotes over the last 20 years and build me a CRM and a point of sale system. And it'll come back and just give it to you. Like, I think it could be that strong in 10 years. And,
well, that's got to make you nervous.
What's that?
That's got to make you nervous.
No, I think it's an opportunity. So like there's opportunities to build tools. There's opportunities to, be the companies that are consulting on these technologies, because, businesses still don't know what they need. They still need, from a services perspective, they're still going to need people that know how to use these tools. So you can see this as a threat and be scared of it and do nothing. Or, if you're in my industry, in the software services industry, or you can see this as a wave that, you can surf if you get on your board right before the wave hits.
Kind of like that startup you mentioned in San Francisco, right? That was originally part of helping people float their individual Bitcoin, their cryptocurrency, right? And then they pivoted to providing the forensics.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think there's a company that's already positioning for this, Turing.com. The name kind of says it all, but they're a staff augmentation company. They do, basically what my company does, like software development services, projects, staff augmentation. They raised $153 million in the last few years at a $1.1 billion valuation. They've got about 1,400 employees. I was just looking at I just did a tweet thread about this last night. So I was looking at their metrics last night. They're all fresh in my head. I think they've got like 1,400 employees. So, and about 20% of them are in the United States. A lot of them are like in Pakistan, India, Latin America.
Sure.
So a company like that
Eastern
typically, Eastern Europe. Yeah. A company like that typically does about $100,000 to $150,000 per employee per year revenue. So like, even if you go on the high end, 150K, they're doing like just over 200 million in revenue based on their headcount. And if they have like extremely healthy EBITDA at 20%, I'm giving them a lot of like really, if we're going on the high end of 150K per employee per year, and like 20% EBITDA, probably not happening in growth mode. But let's just say they're north of 200 million, just north of 200 million, with maybe like $40 million in EBITDA. So like, how did they get to a 1.1 as a services company? How did they get to a $1.1 billion valuation? And keep in mind that valuation was December of 21, before when their headcount was lower. Their headcount was less than 1,000 at the time of that valuation. So in all reality, when they raised at that $1.1 billion valuation, they probably had like 900 employees, and probably their EBITDA was, I'm just going to guess less than 10 million. So like, how do they get to a $1.1 billion valuation? Well, my theory is that they are pitching the VCs, and VCs don't fund services companies typically, by the way. They're funding platform and SaaS and biotech. So my theory is that they said, we're going to go out and blitz the market and get all the MSAs on staff augmentation right now. And we're going to quietly work on this, open AI, code generation, GPT-4, Codex stuff. And
get 150,000 up to 200,000 or whatever per employee, right?
Yeah, and then as soon as this technology is good enough, we'll flip the switch and we'll probably cut headcount and increase output. And next thing you know, we're going to be, we've already blitzed the market for this, so we'll become the largest software services company in the world. We'll become the next Accenture. Like that's what I think they probably pitched to the VCs. Otherwise, how do you raise it like that? The valuation doesn't make sense to me otherwise, unless VCs are really just trying to figure out wherever they can stuff money at the time. But
exactly. And acquisitions too, right? So
So it's just interesting theory I have. We'll see if it plays out. It's either, I started the tweet thread out by saying either this company is going to become the largest software services company in the world, or VCs are just throwing money at whatever.
Well, I think one of the topics that I wanted to talk about is at least my 3 rules or lessons from startups, right? And lesson number 1 is most don't. They don't start up, right? They go out of business.
Yeah.
So as long as the folks who are considering or are involved accept that reality, okay, take step 2. But I think there's so much hype around, these $1.5 billion valuations and, kind of this newer technology, which obviously makes some sense. But in the end, if the fundamental, if you're a capitalist, I'm a capitalist, okay, I am, and I'm looking to buy low, sell high, right, or provide a service that is unique or certainly differentiated enough in the markets that I work with that allow me to provide that service, right, at a higher rate than maybe my competitors. And it's looking for inefficiencies in the marketplace. And in my case, it's about scaling organizations, for sales, right? Increasing sales at companies. And there's so many opportunities that don't really require the risk of kind of the startup, the / venture capital kind of revenue that it's I don't know, it gets all the attention, but it's not the reality of the world. It's not the reality of the day-to-day person.
Yeah, most companies don't raise a ton of VC money. I mean, VC money typically goes to companies that value on top line, not EBITDA.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's distorted and I think over emphasized. And when particularly younger folks, I did this lecture. I did one lecture at Wharton, but that was more on different sales models. But I also did a lecture more recently at Temple University. The interesting thing is that many schools finally have started to offer like professional sales as a degree.
I never understood that. I mean, it's sales is the most. It's the most important skill you can possibly have in business. Even if you're not a salesperson, it's the most important skill. And why does it not? Like the most important skills don't get taught for some reason.
I mean, of course, you get finance, accounting, HR, right? Marketing, all those different and important areas. But right, top line.
But if you're in, let's say you're in HR. Let's say you come out of college and you have an HR degree and you go in and you're working as an intern or like an entry level, HR analyst or something, and your dream is to be the CHRO of that company. You better have sales skills to be able to sell yourself all the way up the ladder if you want to get to that role.
That's true. Everybody's in sales, right? Everybody. And it's not, it's a great point. And it's not just your company's products or services. It's yourself and the value you bring to the table, right? It's a skill, and there's certainly some gamesmanship around it as well. But what I was getting at was in terms of startups, and I've been VP of sales of 2 venture capital backed startups, but I've also worked with quite a few VC backed startups, all technology. The one that I wanted to talk about in terms of failures was a company that we actually garnered about $60 million at the time from Bank of Boston, DLJ, and Oracle, right? So it was a raise, and it was right before the internet bubble. So we're going back.
Oh, wow.
20 years, right? So
how much total did you guys raise there?
It was 60 million. Right.
Wow.
Until we spent every dime.
Back then. Yeah.
It was a lot of money, but money was cheap and free. It was easy. It was the go internet days, and people didn't really have their heads around what it really meant. I remember one of the clients we had was Johnson & Johnson, obviously a big global enterprise, and they created these roles because people just didn't know what to do or what it was necessarily. And these roles were, director of internet, right? I mean, we're laughing now, right? But even then I'm thinking they don't really understand. They don't get it, right? It's not like a thing. It's not like a new department,
Oh man, that's great. So
Yeah.
what did the company do? Like, what was the product?
Yeah, they had a great value proposition, and they were in the right market too. Basically, the concept was and it was focused in the life science kind of pharmaceutical industry. So that's another key thing, right? They're going at an industry that has lots of money, right? It's kind of fundamental, but if you want to make money, you got to work with people who can spend the money. And specifically in the marketing organizations of these global enterprises, they had data, patient data, and it was marketing, not clinical data. So it was, after the product had been released into the marketplace, prescription data by physicians, hospitals, just all of that data. And they would have in different divisions a separate budget for different data, but oftentimes it would be the same kind of data.
So were you guys up against like MicroStrategy? Was that a big competitor of yours back then?
No, it was not. So they basically just tied all of these disparate databases into one, and then created this user interface that the marketing person, because you didn't have to be a software person to use it. That was the tool, right? If you want to look up diabetes, for example, and you could get all of the data that your different databases had and into different kind of spans.
It's business intelligence, though.
It was business intelligence, but they weren't really creating any business intelligence. They were just consolidating, right? All of their business.
It's like the same concept. Like you have disparate systems, you build ETLs, you dump it into a data warehouse, so you have a central central data lake or whatever, and then you put a dashboard on top of the data lake and then pull out some sort of reporting for the executives.
That's right. That's what it was. So at the time, and conceptually, I mean, I kind of refer to it. It was the Google of pharmaceutical marketing data in that respect, right? That was kind of, Google wasn't around really much then, but in retrospect, that's effectively what it was. So the problem, however, was that in order to be competent using it as a marketing person who wasn't a software person, the amount of time required to train that person was just insane. And I figured it out after being there not quite a year, because it all started to, all right, we have a problem here. I figured, in fact, I had the notes right here. It would take 91 years to train the total number of people we needed in terms of licenses, right? Because it was also it's kind of the SaaS model, basically.
Is that 91 man years with your current team that you have in place now?
Well,
back then, like at the time of saying that, with the team, the training team you have, this is how much.
Even if it was really based on the amount of time. That's correct. 91 years was based on the number of people we had. But even if you quadrupled the number of those people to do the training, well, now you have costs that are far beyond a profitable business, right?
Yeah.
So that was the kind of the end of that.
As soon as you told me what the product was, I immediately thought, wow, that's like, you guys were early. You were ahead of your time.
We were early. And again, it was actually an Israeli-based software company that was VC backed, in the US. And the CEO, very excellent visionary, excellent storyteller, which is fine, which is good, right? He really could tell a true story and what the problem was and how we would be able to fix or address that problem. So that's the number 2 rule within startups, because he had never done a startup, and most of the people there at the senior level leadership had not done a startup. So rule number 2 is every member of the leadership team needs to have prior experience, whether successful or unsuccessful. Experience is experience, in a previous startup. And if they don't have that, you're going to run into problems that someone who's done that before had already tackled, seen, knew how to deal with, or better yet, would avoid it to begin with. Not all of them, because they're always new. What's that?
Do you care if it's venture-backed startup or bootstrap startup or just any startup or
any startup, you know, you're going to start from the ground level. Like, I got this great idea for whatever it is. Okay, fantastic. The third rule is more financial. It's like their expected year one cash burn cannot exceed what is in the bank today. So, you know, you can't hope for success, right? You can't hope that, you know, you're able to get additional funding, whether VC or wherever. Obviously, customer revenue is the way to go. And that's the other thing too. You know, once you get institutional money like VCs or private equity, well, obviously they're not doing it because they're good people, which, okay, they are. They're doing it because they want to make money. So that's what speeds up the poll. I remember at Skila, the CEO at the time was not, the founder was kind of more the founder and the spokesperson, but they were smart and they hired, you know, professional leadership team, professional management team. And I was on the sales side. And I remember talking to the CEO. He's like, oh, we got to spend all of this money now. Like, we got to spend it because it was in the bank. And that's, you know, we had to show that we were investing in. And again, hindsight's 2020, but there were a lot of red flags there. The fourth rule, which is not part of my top three, but I'll throw it in there because it was sage advice I'd gotten years before that, is always negotiate your way out on your way in. Always.
Yeah.
So if you're going to take a leadership role, what's that?
With the investors or with anything?
With the company, with the investors, whatever. You know, if you're going to join there's kind of two sides to this. If you're going to join a company, these are critical questions. If you're going to invest into a company, this is also important questions. But if you're going to be part of that team and you're senior enough, then yeah, you need to negotiate your way out on your way in. Because and that's true with any position, I guess, because that's the only time you have leverage.
Yeah, interesting.
Because once the rails start coming off, the train tracks, it's kind of too late, you know.
For the partners, that should be in the operating agreement, but and just kind of like general business engagements, I see what you're saying there. It makes sense.
Yeah. That served me well because I've also done. I did another startup, and I could talk about that. It was a very successful one. This one was a European venture capital firm. They were also in the life science space, and their value proposition was powerful and simple. And it was simply, we can help you get products to market faster. Okay. All right. I'm listening. Well, how are you going to do that? Right. And again, that's a fundamental problem that any pharmaceutical or biotech, if they're in their phase 3 type trials, right? Yeah. The faster they can get it to the market, the better benefit, not only to the patients, obviously, if it's a safe and efficacious.
What year was that for that type of?
This was, I want to say, this was now we are in 2005, 2008 timeframe.
That's a really vague, unique selling proposition. It's like,
well, and that was kind of the fundamental. Now, their specific target market was regulatory affairs. And this was prior, believe it or not, to the FDA digitizing all of the data, because you have to keep in mind that when they do a phase 3 trial, there could literally be 1 million pages, right? Documents, 1 million, right? Because you have all the patient records and the tox, and just that's how big some of these can be. And the FDA requires that in triplicate. So literally, when the company's like, okay, we're going to submit it, right? A tractor trailer shows up, forklifts lift these 3 boxes, into this tractor trailer, and one goes to Maryland, another one goes. There's two other sites that they're delivered to. So now it's submitted per se. Now, when the toxicology group, all right, it's their job to look at the toxicology data. Well, they call down or email down to that particular warehouse, and someone at the warehouse goes and gets a little forklift and gets those boxes of information, puts them on a van, and it's, literally sent to that office, and it sits in a box, and somebody's, the toxicology office person who's responsible for that. That was the process, right? The paper process. So what this tool did, and it was kind of a variation on Adobe, but you could actually change the page numbers. It was very simple, and change kind of some of the content on the fly, right up to literally the day that you submitted it. So it was a way to, because they would change things. They got additional data, or there was, they would constantly, right up to the last minute, there would be changes, because it was a scramble to get this thing, to the FDA for submission. So that was their value proposition. So it was a great tool for that market. And the problem when I took over, because they were not pre-revenue when I started, but they were pre-profit. Obviously, the goal was to get to sustainable profitability, and it was in their sales process. And they'd hired some very talented, experienced people who understood, that regulatory affairs environment, which is its own animal in itself. And the expectation before I got there was that those same people would go and get meetings, with other regulatory affairs professionals at these companies to explain what this is and the value. And it was a sales process thing, because, I've yet to hear someone convince me that this is not true, and that sales is about one thing and one thing only. It's about the number of at-bats. The more often we get an opportunity to speak to someone who may have a benefit of the value we have to offer, the more often that can occur, the higher likelihood that they're going to say,
I argue the quality, though, the quality of the prospects.
Well, that's the key. That's the science, and that's the art. It has to be quality at bats, right? So in their case, they knew who the personas were, like the influencers and decision makers, and we knew certain trigger points when they moved into the certain part of the phase 3 trial. So there, we had enough of that good data as far as the customer journey, where to insert ourselves.
You knew your buyer, essentially.
What's that?
You knew your buyer.
Yeah, we did. We did good homework on the buyer in that industry and in that particular product. But getting those appointments was the challenge. So all we did was we added, this is again going back now, it's commonplace. Basically, I call it the secret weapon, inside sales, which now would be called BDRs, business development reps, or SDRs, right? And their job was just to get the appointments. Now we're talking to the right people who have the problem we could potentially fix, but because all they did all day long was try to get these appointments, it was just at bats, and we would get more appointments. Now we send in, once the appointment is secured, a little bit of qualification, the true kind of content expert, that was expensive. And so they spent all of their time taking the ball and getting it across the finish line versus doing stuff that wasn't value add relative to their cost. And they weren't terribly good at it either.
So what were your SDRs doing to get these appointments? Like, were they just doing cold calling and emailing, or were they doing something like creative and interesting out of the box?
I tell you, it was just block and tackle. It was emails and calls, and LinkedIn really, it was there, but it wasn't a tool that was really used effectively as far as networking, certainly, but as far as prospecting is concerned. So it was just that.
Yeah. And if you have a really targeted niche, that you understand your ICP and your buyer really well, and you have a targeted niche, it's not just like spray and pray kind of thing.
Yeah.
You can get, even still today, to this day, you can get appointments through email, cold email with a really message.
Yeah. And that's a whole other conversation of what is working, what isn't working, because it's certainly gotten harder to, get the eyeballs, the mind time with prospects. They're getting data with so much.
I want to ask you a question. I've never asked you this before. You've got a lot of interesting, history in your career. Just even on this, call here so far, we've touched on a few, cool periods of what you've worked on. What was the most exciting year? Like the most exciting company, most exciting time, the craziest, the coolest, the funnest time for you in your career?
I would say two of them. One was the CDC solutions, which I just mentioned, because eventually, it clicked, and now we're generating more revenues. Now we finally became actually profitable and sustainably so, because it was a license model. And yeah, then we
You were VP of sales there, I think. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're kind of the guy in charge of figuring out how to make it click and how to, feed the mouths in the company.
That's right. I mean, my job was to generate as much, profitable revenue as quickly as, possible. Yeah. With the least amount of resources. Right.
That's easy.
I think that's it. Well, I'm not that it's complicated. It's just that's the role, right? I wasn't in R&D, right? I wasn't in engineering. I wasn't in, that my job was top line, make it happen. Which is, by the way, why the average B2B sales leader at companies, average lifespan is 19 months.
Wow.
So, yeah,
it's really low for a VP of sales.
Mm-hmm.
How do you run a company with how do you run a company with no, continuity? Yeah, consistency.
That's why, a lot of companies struggle, and it doesn't matter. Again, that's your job, right? So it could be a product that's not terribly good. It could be kind of out of date. There could be competitors that have come in and offered a better solution.
Is that a symptom of poor leadership from the CEO, though? If you've got VPs of sales turning over every 19 months, is that because you have the wrong product, the wrong service, the wrong message, the wrong market, just the wrong comp package for your VP of sales? Is there something?
Yeah, I mean, certainly you could point to that, and all companies, even though private companies aren't, the information isn't public, they still are driven by boards, and they're looking at each quarter, right? And if there's 2 quarters that don't hit the mark, well, who's responsible? What do you do? Well, usually marketing, resources get shot first, and then they shoot the VP of sales because they're not going to shoot themselves.
Okay, so that's interesting. I thought when you said that earlier, my head went to they're leaving and just the VP of sales is quitting and going to a different firm. What's the percentage of the time you think of those 19-month averages? What's the percentage of that where they're getting let go for poor performance versus them leaving on their own accord?
It would probably, I don't know the exact number, but it's definitely the much greater percentage in being let go because, again, it starts to become political. Sales aren't where the company expected them to be for whatever reason, doesn't matter. And there's a couple board meetings, and the question to the CEO is, okay, what are you going to do? What's your plan? All right. They don't know other than, I need to take some sort of action. And that's usually the VP of sales.
Well, this is a good place, I think, to insert a plug for what you do. You want to talk a little bit about what Innovo Sales does and kind of how you guys work with companies and why companies might want to think about working with a firm like yours?
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. We work with B2B companies, first of all, and we work with the leadership team, typically the CEO, the founder, and our focus is predominantly small to mid-sized companies. We don't do a lot of work with startups. I have done some, and I can talk a little bit about that more recently. But startups typically don't have money, and we don't work for free. So they're typically private equity-owned portfolio companies, or just any company that the CEO believes that we got to get more sales for whatever reason. And oftentimes those companies, the founders, CEOs kind of built that company up to 10 million, which is in itself a phenomenal accomplishment, right? To get to that level of anything, to even be in business after 5 years, you've beaten the odds, and then to be at 10 million. So I don't want to take anything away from those folks, but they say, look, we want to get to the next level. All right. They haven't been to that
50 or 25.
Well, if you're at 10, you should be realistic, 15, 20, right? You can't say, oh, I want to be, I'm at 10 million and I want to be at 100 million. Now, if I had actually a startup, it was a SaaS company, worked with them for a year and a half. They went public, which I knew was a mistake just based on my experience, but they did. And then the doo-doo started hitting the fan there because they weren't ready for it. But I'll give an example. In that case, it was look, we need to double our sales. Now, this company, even though it was a software company, they actually had been around for a while, but they'd never really capitalized on the market or leveraged what they had. So they wanted to go public and get those resources, money, and really pull the trigger on expansion for the particular product that they were involved with. They actually had 4 different products. And the CEO said, look, we want to double in size in 1 year. All right. Well, I hear that. And my first thought in my head is, well, that's great. Get in line. Who doesn't? Right. But my first question I asked them is, all right, let's say for some reason unknown to us, we open our laptops tomorrow morning and lo and behold, there are, license agreements, basically contracts, orders, whatever you want to call it, that represent twice the revenue we had in the last 12 months. There it is. What would happen? What would you do? Right? How would things change operationally? It's one of those be careful what you wish for situations, because if that by chance did happen, obviously the level of service, for implementation that have to be ramped up, the tickets that are coming in from issues from customers would balloon. Now you have that group that needs to have to be ready. In the end, your existing customers would get a much lower level of service, quality service, and your new customers that you brought on are going to be disappointed because they aren't getting what you said they were going to get, right? It would be a shit show, basically, in most cases. Now,
it's interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
I would say, okay, so now that we have that premise, now let's take it out 1 year. If we know and we shoot for that, it's not just getting the revenue. I mean, not that that's easy, but okay, let's say we do. We have to think through, how does this ripple through the organization? So I was tasked, and we put together. We ended up hiring. I'm trying to remember because this finished up at the end of this August, and I created a new sales organization where we broke down different roles and responsibilities. We put everybody in product groups, or 4 different products versus being all over the place, which they were before. They had BDRs, but we needed more. So we outsourced some of that as well, because we did a good job of managing metrics. We understood kind of, okay, if we get this amount of appointments, it results in this amount of, quotes, and here's our close rate, and the amount of time that takes, because this was a longer term strategic sales process. It was not transactional at all. So we we also expanded into Europe. So we got an organization set up there. I wasn't directly involved with that. I was directly involved in hiring the people, but we got a German law firm to put all the paperwork together. That was their specialty, to create, an entity in Germany. We already had some presence in APEC, but we had to increase that. Bottom line is, it was this whole organization. And now we also needed folks that would support, the training element, right? It had to be now a separate kind of role and responsibility. They had zero strategy around channel, which was a huge opportunity for this company because they were small. And if you could leverage your technology through the Accentures, the PwCs, and even the mid-tier players, that's going to really help drive revenue over time. So that was another hire. So we started to execute, and sure enough, back at the office, it started to get manic, and there's always going to be, there's never going to be a situation where we have unlimited resources, because if that's the case, you have other problems.
Yeah. I mean, I totally get it. My company grew,
It's a balancing. Yeah. In your
80%.
business, I mean, that's what it's all about, right? You
Yeah.
don't want to have people sitting on the bench, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had the opposite problem most of this year. We don't necessarily have people sitting on the bench, but we grew 80% this year, and we basically built out a ton of leadership and operating people that are at general administrative on our P&L. They're not billable, so we grew a ton top line, but our EBITDA percentage went down. We dollar amount we're up a little bit, but from last year, but percentage wise we're way down, and it's because of the investment in OpEx.
That's right, and it's so critical because getting them in the door, if you're getting the quality at bats is one thing, but now you actually have to do the hard work of delivering, right, and keeping them happy, and in a perfect world, so happy that they want to refer you or use you for additional projects, which I think, speaking to you in the past, Brian, that's one of the big growth drivers for your firm is existing customers, right?
Well, we do. I mean, we get a lot of referrals and stuff from existing customers, and we, ton of repeat business. We don't really, we don't have a lot of churn with customers, very little, single digit percents, but, we've got, we've got a outreach engine. Over 50% of our new revenue comes from outreach, cold email.
That's great.
Just doing outbounding of various types, LinkedIn, conference outbounding, all sorts of stuff like that.
No, that's fantastic. That's really a great. So I imagine you focus on any particular service or any particular vertical or.
Yeah, we're highly specialized in the Laravel and Vue.js ecosystem and then enterprise WordPress. So we've kind of just focused on those ecosystems. We used to be more wide, and then I've just over the years just chiseled away all the things that aren't our core focus and just got really specific on those core technology focuses. A lot of it's B2B, a lot of it's SaaS companies. Some of it's more like, like logistics or, manufacturing, more like, kind of traditional types of companies, but
has the size, the top line of the companies that you work with continually moved up? That's beautiful. You guys are on definitely that's a great story, and I wish more folks would approach it the same way.
Well, it's funny because you brought up earlier, like the goal was to you brought up the story and you're like, the person says, I just want to double next year. And what I've found is companies that are growing that fast or faster, typically, maybe they set goals like that. But I think a lot of the times, a story that popped in my head, it's really old, but the Rothschilds. So they figured out like currency arbitrage. I think it was in the 1800s, maybe it was late 1700s. I don't know the years, but they figured out currency arbitrage and they invented bonds. So they had essentially back then, information travels by horse. So they created the fastest information sharing network on the planet at the time, and were able to arbitrage currencies across countries and cities because they had the fastest traveling information.
Right.
I heard a story that, or I was reading something that they were making so much money so fast they didn't have any accounting. They were just like, the way that the person telling the story shared it was, imagine you go into one of those machines with like dollar bills flying around and you're just grabbing as many as you can, and then you walk out of the machine and like you just have a handful of money, and someone says, how much? And someone says, hey, how much money do you have? And you're like, I don't know, I just grabbed as much as I could.
It's a lot. It's a lot. And that's so with this particular company, that was the issue. And so when you ask about what we do, the first thing we typically do, in fact, it's the first thing we do is an assessment. And we really want to understand, okay, before we get in there, it's like a doctor. I think doctors are the best salespeople because they spend so much time learning before they diagnose. They want information, and start connecting dots, and they come to a conclusion, or a reasonable one, or a couple options possibly, before they prescribe a treatment. Right? We're the same way as any, I think, good consulting firm should be. So we have I would say, proprietary question and answer, multiple choice that is given to the leadership team, folks in sales and marketing. And there's no wrong answers. It's really just level setting things. We want to know where you are today. We want to understand what market you're in. Is the demand overall increasing, the same, or decreasing, right? What is the tide in your market space doing? And we do quite a lot of interviews with these folks to validate what we're starting to see. And we gather lots of data, CRM data, compensation plans, just lots of data. And really, in the end, we just want to level set. Where are we today? What is our current sales strategy? What are our current sales processes? What does our current sales organization structure and people look like? And what are the metrics that this company is looking at, which they believe drive the needle in the direction they want it to go? So once we have that exercise, then now we can make some therapeutic recommendations. And that's the output of the first portion of it. And we have a very detailed, prioritized set of actions to take. And oftentimes with the companies we work with, they don't necessarily have someone who's kind of been at that next level, or if they do, those folks just don't have time to kind of put all these pieces, to implement them. A lot of legwork, a lot of infrastructure pieces that have to be put in place.
So you've always struck me as just a no bullshit guy. So, I mean, do you go in and, like how quickly will you call the baby ugly? If the CEO's baby's ugly, just, will you just say it, like call it out and say, hey, the baby's ugly. This is what we need to do. Or,
yeah, that's it. I mean, before we engage with any client, there's a couple things I do ahead of time. But one is I ask two questions to the CEO. Do you want me to tell you the truth, or do you want me to tell you what you'd like to hear? And every time they say, oh, no, we want the truth. Okay, good. You have that understanding. Now, that doesn't mean, and it oftentimes comes to bite them later, but that's part of that initial process, particularly with the questionnaires in these different areas. And this isn't necessarily a sales thing, it's more of a leadership thing, because you may see an area where the CEO is scoring things here, but the rest of the team is scoring things here. That doesn't mean either one is wrong. That just means the communication is off. Because if the leadership, all of the folks in the leadership team are not in sync with what our value proposition is, what our goals are, there's no way in heck the rest of the organization is going to get there, right? So part of it's just that.
Is that the entire leadership team, or do you focus mostly on like go-to-market team members?
It's involving the senior leadership team. They have to be involved because they need to know, and they're going to be the ones who are going to make decisions. We're going to make unilateral decisions for them, but if we recommend something, they obviously have some input, or we have to sell them on why, because
so like the CFO gets involved in this kind of like sales exercise.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Marketing, CFO. I mean, this literally we had another client. It was fairly recent. They were a distributor, but they distributed commercial cooking and commercial refrigeration equipment up and down the East Coast. They're about a $65 million top line company. And I got referred in because it was a private equity portfolio company. They had shit the bed the year before, and the bank was getting nervous and sent in a colleague of mine's kind of a turnaround person. And they did a nice job, stabilized things. And then this colleague said, hey, you need to focus on top line. And that's when they brought me in. So spent hours and hours and hours with the CFO and CEO, right? And the other folks in the membership, in the leadership team, because it was going to impact.
CFO that was, sometimes CFOs are kind of like hybrid CFO, COO. Was that kind of the case in that one, or?
Yeah. And oftentimes that is the case because of the size of the companies. And they were distributors. And if you get into manufacturing, they'll typically have a dedicated person who's, COO. and a CFO. The CFO is usually trying to manage, their investors. So in this case, it was private equity. Private equity wanted to get out, and we needed to generate a minimum of 2 consistent quarters of revenue and profit growth, because they obviously wanted to get their EBITDA up so that they could get a more attractive multiple. So that was the plan. We need to sell this company. You got to fix stuff.
So sometimes working with PE, they just want to like gut everything. They just want to go in and just like slash heads and just, get the gap on, margin higher so that you can just kind of show it on paper and then just, hand it off to someone else and make it their problem. Were they one of those types of firms, or were they more, did they see kind of like the value in building a good company?
Well, I think all of them recognize the value of building a good, sustainable company, because if you can demonstrate that with the numbers, it becomes more valuable. But typically, in that PE model, if they buy multiple companies, sure, we can standardize. We don't need HR departments in every of these all the acquisitions. We have one, counting the same way, and other departments. So that's where they see kind of the benefits. But the private equity folks, they're not operators. They don't kind of dig into the day-to-day, like, how do you do it? So they're obviously numbers driven. They're financial people. So yeah, they see a cost, and it's like, how do we reduce that cost? And at the board level, it's sometimes where I'll go in and kind of pitch the case, like, here's why we can't reduce that cost, because we actually need to increase that cost, because here's the return on investment. Now, will you realize that in the first, maybe even second quarters? No. But what you're looking to do is, the third, fourth quarter and beyond is where the payoff is, right? And, they're people, they're reasonable. So that's
where like this, we talked about sales skills earlier, teaching sales skills in school. Obviously you're in the sales department, so you should have sales skills, hopefully. But, imagine if you're in, say, like the logistics department, and you need to, explain why you need to increase the cost to the private equity, chairman or whatever, or to the board of a private equity firm. You need to explain why you need to increase the cost. But, you're just like a person who's skilled on the technical aspects of, organizing logistics and supply chain, and you don't have those sales skills to be able to explain why this cost needs to go up in a situation like that.
That's actually, that's very, very true. And not that I want to stereotype too much, but I see that in technology and software companies, right? We have some folks who just know their technology inside and out, as they should, but they're not the best communicators, particularly when it comes to the board or, the organization as a whole, right? And you get to a certain point, and that's where you have to look at yourself, look at your company, and maybe there's someone else who should be leading this company. I'll continue to do what I do. I enjoy doing what I do. I'm good at what I'm doing. I'm not going to, forsake any equity necessarily, but I don't have to be, and nor should I be, the face of the organization, And that was one of my kind of things, that some notes I put down is where companies, struggle. And that's, they have to be unemotional, and that's easier said than done. You build this business, it's your baby, right? You started it from the beginning, and you've done every job relatively well, but you can't continue to do that. Just the amount of information that changes so quickly, it's just not feasible to kind of be on top of those things.
And this jerk Mark comes in and calls your baby ugly, and
that's right. That's right. And I've had those conversations, the professional, but I kind of reference, hey, remember when I asked you want the truth? As truth as I see it. Okay, so it's my truth. But I haven't had a negative experience with that. I mean, they appreciate it. In fact, oftentimes I'll hear, not that infrequently, look, you're one of the few people I feel that just tells me the truth. Because when you get to that level, and people that are in the company, I mean, obviously they have a vested interest to please you. Yeah. And you don't always get get the same information. I mean, a good example with this one company I was referring to, this distribution company, they put together this comp plan, and each of the companies they bought was different, but they tried to standardize it, and they did. But when I speak to the salespeople and this, the sales leaders, like they're all scratching their heads. They have no idea how it works, right? And that's not good, right? It wasn't that they weren't intelligent. It was just it was like a rubric. And ultimately, it was a kind of a shell game too, that they realized. And I'm like, look, man, and talking to leadership, particularly CEOs, like, oh, we spent so much time explaining. What do you mean they don't understand it? Look, I'm just telling you, they don't understand it. It's complicated. It's not motivating behaviors that you want. We need to change. And here's a different approach to the same thing. That'll be easier. It's not going to be any more expensive. It'll be transparent. Folks will know where they are, where they need to go much more simply. And it's going to get the behavior from the right people. And the behavior it doesn't get from some people, they're not going to be part of the organization. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
What happens as companies grow? Things, roles change, the needs of the companies change. It's a fact of growing a company. Yeah.
And the other thing is what I see too is the companies that are successful, they really, and you're a good example here, they really understand, why prospects buy. They understand their audience, their markets. You made a good point that used to be have a lot of services, and people in VCs get caught in this trap sometimes too. Founders, it's like, oh, they go to make the pitch, and this is $1 billion opportunity, right? Because this technology can be used here, healthcare.
We just get 1% of the market.
Yeah, manufacturing. It's like it can be like it's Stripe, something like that, pervasive, and it's not. And it's like time out. Let's focus on two verticals. We don't want to be an inch deep and a mile wide. I see this all the time. What we want to be is an inch wide, but a mile deep. If we can prove that out, run into problems to solve it. Once we get those two moving, and maybe one of them isn't the best one to go after, but that also solves or at least addresses a lot of the infrastructure, the operations piece of it too. Then we can start expanding to other verticals.
It's a lot.
So you started out wide, but now you've narrowed it down. It's just much more manageable, right? It's
a lot more cost effective to build a company that way, because when you've got a specialty in a niche, not only does everyone in your team work together better, but you can, everyone can talk to the customer better. The expertise on the team is just that much better. So you get more done with less. And it's just so much more efficient to build a niche company than it is to try to build, this catch-all.
This catch-all, right. It's a much more and that's the reality of most, organizations. It's just that, right? When you start out, you're smaller and you have limited resources, and it's okay, what do we do with what we have? That's a hard enough question to answer in itself. If you start wanting to get into different areas, it just overcomplicates things. And I think you made a great point too. Now you also have employees who are part of your bench, right? Because they're learning something about an industry, something about particular technology, even if they're not focused in it, just even through osmosis. They know about it. They understand the concept, right? So now if you have someone talented and you want to move them to another area, you don't have to start from scratch, you don't have to hire.
I saw an interview with Jeff Bezos. I think it was like 99, maybe 2000, when they were only doing books back then.
Okay.
And so it's a great example of like inch wide, mile deep. They were only doing books. And the interviewer says, so I think they were asking about like bookstores, like Barnes and Nobles, and are you going to take over the industry, the book industry? And they said, well, we plan to disrupt e-commerce. In general, we're just starting with books because it's difficult to sell online, and we think we can do it the best. And then the funniest part of the interview at the end, Jeff Bezos goes, well, I think this could be $100 million company.
Well, he wasn't wrong.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So, I guess some other, points. I guess the other key driver, it's they understand their, at least I should say, know sales metrics. Again, I'm referring, obviously, my area is sales, right? But you have a sense because there's data, and it doesn't have to be spot on, deadly accurate, detailed data, but you have a good sense that the average life cycle is 3 months. Okay. Some are longer, some are shorter, but it's going to take about 3 months. You understand how many meetings it's taken to get to that point, right? And so you have some simple buckets of information that are general, but if things are outliers, that's a red flag, right? And so knowing those metrics, even in a general way, is really, really important and valuable if a company wants to grow. Because you plug those basic numbers in, it's okay, if we want to double, okay, how many proposals? You just do the simple math, easier said than done. But and the other piece is
it's like baking a cake, but you're making it double the size.
Yeah.
How do you change the recipe to get to, the recipe says this, but let's make it, double the size.
It's twice. We want a cake that's twice as big, right? And in theory, that should work, right? It should work.
At least on your COGS, maybe not on your OpEx, but
at least you have some pathway, versus companies that so you have to. One thing, I've been, VP of sales of many different organizations. In fact, certainly VC-backed startups, but the other end of the spectrum, I've also been vice president of sales of a small $17 billion division of GE, right? And those are, and by the way, that was a small division with GE at the time. Those are two entirely different animals. But what was my point about that? Is the talent is really the key in the leadership, and I think that's one of the other key takeaways is that the sales leadership, at least, has to hold people accountable, and I see that particularly with private companies, and that's where another one of the questions I ask, if it is a private company and family owned or was started by an individual, a founder, and I'll ask them, I say, are there any sacred cows in your organization, right? I need to know now, because if Billy Bob, your cousin, has been with you and he stinks at sales, but it's the last place you could find a place for him because he won't cause as much trouble, you got to let me know, because if I don't, I'm going to recommend Billy Bob get out of here, right? But it's your company. You tell me. I'll work around them if I have to, but let me know.
Yeah, that's kind of you.
Hey, they're paying me money to help them fix things, So, and that's kind of the tail end of what we do, is then we roll up our sleeves and help them execute and to actually make it happen. And we do a risk sharing model. So yeah, there's a retainer on a monthly basis because there's a lot of legwork that's involved. We become the de facto sales leader in some cases. Help with the hiring and onboarding and ongoing management. So each quarter we get together with the CEO and say, okay, what are our goals? And usually it's revenue, right? So if doing our assessment, we know we can get to A, B, C, D, E in terms of total revenue. Depending on the sales cycle, the first quarter and a half might just be kind of objective based, because depending on the sales cycle, maybe you get lucky, but not much. Whatever happened a few months before is what's resulting in sales today. But beyond that, it's usually just sales, right? So if we hit certain targets that we both committed to, then we get a little piece of that too. And the founders, the companies typically like that, because we're not just doing consulting and saying, hey, here's how you should change. It's like, it better work because our income is directly tied to it as well. So
yeah.
Anyhow, we've been on for quite a while. which
I
is
think
cool.
this is our longest episode yet, but
you can edit out some.
no, we're good. It's all uncut. So I think we're at a good wrapping up point though. Is there anything else you want to plug or anything that's anything else you want to close on?
No, thanks. I will make one additional plug. My marketing, I call him my marketing guru, and we again saw a need, and it's with sales leaders, sales managers, and oftentimes, particularly with the smaller companies, a very good salesperson gets the opportunity to now be a manager, right? And some folks that they want to do that, they think they want to do that, and unfortunately, even with larger companies, there's not a lot of training for sales leadership in B2B companies, and invariably, things go sideways, and they try different things. They're smart people, and it's not working, and they can't really go to their boss and say, "Hey, I've tried all these things, nothing's working," right? Because that may be the second to last conversation they have with that boss. Yeah. Basically, what they're not sure how to improve things. So we made a decision to create a community, a private community of B2B sales leaders. You have to qualify for it, right? So we only want folks who are actually leading a sales team. We're industry agnostic. It's only B2B. And we've created a full course with multiple modules on different aspects of growing sales within a B2B company and skills that would be needed, because being a good leader or sales manager, it's not rocket science. It's just a different skill, right? It's a different approach to something that you were really familiar with when you were the individual contributor. And that community, we have people that come in and speak. It's web-based. It's a subscription service. So from a business perspective, is also the idea is to kind of level out revenues, because it tends to be lumpy on the consulting side. But we've launched it. We have a bunch of members. It's going well. We're enjoying it. We have a database. It's called Innovo Sales Leaders.
InnovoSalesLeaders.com.
.com. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
INNOVO salesleaders.com. Yeah, I love that. That's a great business. I love those recurring community businesses. How quickly did it take you to get a scale of membership that made sense, like reaching that critical mass to make it valuable from a community perspective?
Yeah. It took over a year, and I would blame partly myself for that, just because we're running our core business, and now that things have intentionally kind of scaled down a little bit, so we can spend more time on this. So now we're starting to really see the benefits of that. So,
cool. I love it.
It took a while.
Pick your brain more about that offline, because I have another business I'm working on that's not exactly that, but it's sort of that for the agency, demand gen space.
Yeah.
So that we should, offline have a combo on that.
That would be fun. I'd love to. I can tell you all about the mistakes we've made to get here.
Cool.
So you can avoid them.
Love it.
Yeah.
Mark, thanks so much for coming on today. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise, Brian. And I look forward to seeing you again. And this, by the way, we met through a client of mine who actually happened to be on the board of this company as well. And I've been pushing them to e-commerce. So we're going to get you guys engaged again, because I know you were real helpful out of the gate, and they weren't ready. But we're starting to get to the point where the market's going to demand it. So
cool. Yeah, we're here when you're ready to chat.
Right on. Thank you.
All right, Mike. I'll see you.
Bye-bye.